Hi everyone. Today we're going to cover the major hydropower plant that is rumored to be under construction by China in the Tibetan Plateau. So I'm going to go over what we know, likely configuration options for such a massive hydropower plant project. It's rumored to have an installed capacity once completed of over 60 gigawatts, which is roughly 3 times the installed generating capacity at Three Gorges Dam. There's been a variety of news stories about this project or potential project, and I'm skeptical about a lot of them. I'll explain that here in a bit. And of course, you can't have any type of major project in China without there being some controversy, particularly those involving hydropower plants on international rivers. Now this stretch of river in China is called the Yarlung Tsangpo. This is the overall location, again as I mentioned, on the Tibetan Plateau. And this is the overall river system. You can see it starts out in China, it skirts the mountains near Nepal, makes a big turn, this great bend, and then comes on down into India and Bangladesh. If this project's built, Bangladesh could turn out to be the biggest loser in the whole thing. Now, here's a definition of the Brahmaputra River. It's a trans-boundary river which flows through southwestern China, northeastern India, and Bangladesh. The Tibetan name is Yarlung Tsangpo, and you can see it's just one of many river systems that are fed from glacial melting on the Tibetan Plateau. It's such a massive area. Sometimes the Tibetan Plateau is referred to as the third pole on Earth. Just a view of an area in Tibet. Now, as a result of the China Civil War, Tibet came under the control of the PRC in 1951. And later, the Dalai Lama, who was a signatory to this agreement, said he signed it under duress, and he had to flee to go to exile in India, where he's been ever since. Now, the area of this project is here, where the Great Bend occurs, where the river flows from east to north and back south again. This flows through a massive canyon, about 3 times the size of the Grand Canyon. So let's look at a Google Earth view. Let's kind of zoom in on this area. Obviously very mountainous, very remote. Reportedly, they only got roads in there recently, some of the last roads to be built in China. And it flows around this mountain called Namcha Barwa. And this mountain is the 27th tallest mountain in the world at 7,782 meters or 25,531 feet. That's only about 4,000 feet less than Mount Everest. And there's 2 options for this hydro facility. One is a diversion dam or run-of-the-river dam, where basically you're just using the natural gradient of the river to generate hydroelectricity, and you only have a minor impoundment, if any, just to feed water into the diversion tunnel. So here's the location of where this tunnel would start. As I mentioned, this is a massive canyon. So China would be looking to take advantage of the massive gradient that this river has through this canyon. This river in this area has an average elevation of 13,000 feet, which is the highest in the world, and is very inaccessible. Now, the idea for this project came out of China's 14th five-year plan. So the idea here is to build a relatively small dam, 50 meters in height, to harness the energy of a 2,000 meter gradient change across the diversion tunnel, or over 6,000 feet. So this is an image off ABC website. These various news sources that I cite in this video have links in the description in case you want to check it out. So the length of this diversion tunnel, there's supposedly 2 potential alignments, anywhere from 42 kilometers to 50 kilometers, which would put it similar length to the Channel Tunnel between France and England. Here's a few photos of the Namcha Barwa mountain, quite beautiful. Undoubtedly environmentally sensitive. There are many areas of cultural significance. So as I mentioned, this would be a run-of-river dam. To date, there's been no official statement about the existence or start of this project. So I see this in many such articles where they reference satellite images that supposedly show the start of construction for this project, but yet they don't show it in the news article. There are a couple of other articles that purport to show aerial photography of the area, but you do a little more digging and you realize it's a couple thousand miles away to the west. So here's the main features. As I mentioned, 60 gigawatt installed capacity is planned. It's all part of China's plan to achieve carbon neutrality. I don't believe that. I'll get into the real reasons I think that China is building such facilities. I mean, obviously, the power is going to be nice, but it's not the overriding consideration here, I believe. And this internet summary indicates construction began in December 2022. Again, there's no evidence that that is the case. Now let's contrast a run-of-river hydroelectric power project to that of an impoundment, where basically a large dam creates the reservoir to create the difference in water elevation from upstream to downstream that can be used to generate the hydropower. And this is the type of dam that Three Gorges Dam is. There's a picture of Three Gorges, aerial view. And as I was saying, it's a much more massive structure with a height of nearly 600 feet or 181 meters. So the height from the stream bed to the top of the dam. And just to compare, this is the location for Three Gorges. And of course the Three Gorges Dam's on the Yangtze River. And just to be complete, another type of hydroelectric power project is a pump storage facility where water is pumped to a reservoir at higher elevations at night, and the water is released during the day when electricity is in higher demand. Now it depends on your utility regulations. I know some places allow for a differential in power costs between off-peak times and peak times. That's been the genesis of several of these hydropower projects. Others, where there is no differential, exist just to produce more power when it's needed during the day, during peak times. Again, I mentioned the 5-year plan. That meeting for that plan was held in December 2021. And this project, whether or not it's real, the mere talk of it has been enough to cause grave concern with neighboring countries. And from this article says, the Chinese government has to date dismissed these massive and highly controversial water diversion proposals, but it started building dams on the upstream reaches of the Brahmaputra River in 2009. So far it's built 6 hydro plants on the upper reaches of the river. And according to Chinese officials, these dams are the run-of-the-river type. So another aspect of a major hydropower project in this region is the high seismicity. The largest recorded earthquake in modern times, an 8.6 magnitude earthquake, occurred in this region. And usually you have to be extremely careful when you cite large reservoirs or hydropower projects in earthquake country. I mean, the concerns about seismicity is what scuttled Auburn Dam in California in the 70s. And they had much lower potential seismicity than you do in this area of China. And the reason for that is you have a collision between the Indian continental plate and the Eurasian continental plate. So those plate boundaries converge, which results in the whole mountain range, including the Himalayas, being pushed up year by year. Now we mentioned these other dams on the Brahmaputra. There's a view of this. Now there's an excellent article on this website, Stimson. Again, there's a link in the description. And of course, China has thousands of dams throughout the country, and they've installed many dams on the Mekong River that feed Southeast Asia. And there's been a lot of controversy with that because China let these downstream countries receive very little water because they were impounding water in order to maximize their hydropower generation. So again, China doesn't have a great reputation of providing the adequate degree of cooperation with these neighboring countries on these international rivers. But I suggest you check out this article. It's very in-depth and extremely interesting. But I want to read an excerpt from this article. So this feature article was released in April 2020. The authors of this article have discovered that the unprecedented wet season dam restrictions result from an optimization of dry season releases used to generate maximum amounts of electricity for sale to China's eastern provinces. Well, they do the same thing at Three Gorges Dam. Electricity market prices are much higher in the dry season than the wet season, so the decision to release water during the dry season is profit-driven. To prepare for the next dry season, China's dams must restrict flow during the wet season, and 2019 was the first time the entire 11-dam cascade was operated in a coordinated fashion. This came as a result of 3 new dams coming online during 2018 and the installation of new transmission lines to China's eastern urban demand markets. And again, talking about impacts to India, the Brahmaputra River accounts for nearly 30% of India's freshwater resources. Many have raised concerns about China's tinkering with the Yarlung Dam upriver, and it certainly does not help that China's intent to divert a portion of the Brahmaputra's water to arid parts of North China has remained a well-known point of contention between the two nations in the past. Reports have also indicated that a twin disaster may be looming for India if the new dam is actually built. As the super dam engulfs the flow of the Brahmaputra River, some assert that India could stand to face acute shortages due to weakened flow in the winter season. Conversely, if China releases excess water from the structure during its monsoons, future flash floods could become a more frequent sight for India downriver. And this happened this past year in Vietnam, which I'll cover here in a second. So I mentioned how the Brahmaputra accounts for nearly 30% of the country's freshwater resources. It also accounts for 44% of its total hydropower potential. So as a result of China potentially building this mega project, India has authorized construction of 13 major dams for their portion of the Brahmaputra River in India. And as I mentioned, Three Gorges Dam released a tremendous amount of water which caused downstream flooding, but the flooding was mostly in China, but they did the same thing along the Mekong River, which inundated Vietnam. And this shows this cycle. This is for Three Gorges Dam, but they let the river level raise up during the winter to maximize hydropower generation. They raise it all the way to max pool, and then they draw it down during the monsoon season, and then they let it build back up again. But the difference between max pool for hydropower generation and that for their operating pool for flood control is not that great. I mean, it does provide tremendous flood control storage, but again, its primary purpose is not flood control, it's hydropower generation. So there's going to be times where they've held water for hydropower generation and realize they've got to release a whole bunch of it to make room for more flood water. And sometimes those decisions may be made late. Again, his headline here, flood-struck Vietnam flags concerns about water from China dams. And this past summer we had Typhoon Yagi, killed many, many people throughout Vietnam. So again, one of China's justifications for these major hydropower projects is that they're trying to go green or carbon neutral, which is not the case at all. They're just trying to get more and more control of these upstream sources of water, whether it's to the detriment of their downstream neighboring countries or not. But this chart does show that demand for coal power production is likely to flatten off in the coming years as additional nuclear and hydro and wind come online. So you would think it'd be a pretty simple thing to look at, say, Google Earth to find out what's going on for this area of the dam, and a lot of the images are out of date. I'm not sure if Google has some kind of arrangement with the PRC or not, but it just strikes me as extremely odd that you have all these news articles talking about indications that dam construction along this bend in the Brahmaputra River has been started, but where's the proof? There was an article citing this photo as proof. Well, this is in a completely different area of China, this area here. So I mentioned this image is from January 2021. So it's out of date relative to determining whether this project has started. You know, I've looked at Google Maps with the aerial view. It indicates a copyright of 2024. I couldn't find when the image was actually collected, but close examination of where a tunnel would start shows all natural environment, that no man-made activity except for this road that goes through there. So I'll continue to follow this story. The other possibility to a diversion tunnel is a series of dams called cascade dams, so one after the other, to take advantage of the large drop in head along a given reach of the river. I mean, obviously you can't just build one dam. The canyon, as tall as it is, wouldn't be tall enough to accommodate that, and the structure would be impossibly large to build. So you have to build a series of dams, and I'm just extremely skeptical that a dam or a tunnel project of this magnitude could be built in such a remote area. Of course, we see China all the time want to take on these types of projects for national pride and bragging rights. I've done past videos about Three Gorges Dam, and if there's anything that's perceived to be even slightly negative about the project or its impacts, I get all the posters from China and their sympathizers trying to rake me over the coals in the comments section. But I'm just not buying that in such a remote area that this is actually a viable project. I think they're likely to continue building dams far upstream, but not around the Namchabara mountain. So with that, I'd like to send a shout out to the channel members. I really appreciate your ongoing support, as well as those of you who have provided super thanks. That's another great way to support the channel. I'm going to roll credits here at the end. Please stay tuned for future videos. I've got a lot of exciting new video topics coming up, as well as updates on the more popular series that I've done on this channel. So stay tuned.